Hey everybody, welcome to the AI Data Quant series videos where we talk about a little bit about how AI can help your business and kind of particularly focus on automation. I wanted to talk a little bit about automation today because I have touched on that in the past as a kind of mechanism by which an outcome that you can focus on with AI, and mentioned that it's one that I find particularly interesting and that kind of seems to have a longer history than just LLMs, and maybe is interesting in a different way. So I guess what I'd like, what I want to kind of think about is there are two ways that you can use AI. One is as better tools for humans to use, right? So inside your business, you could provide, say, an LLM-based tool for managers to use to do basic software engineering without engineers. Now, there's a lot of reports that doesn't work very well yet, and I think that's 100% true. However, I would say I'm not sure that that's a reason to not pursue it, because it's kind of early days. So you would expect it to not work very well. I mean, if you expect these things to come out and generate really great software engineering right out of the gate, I think anyone who's been a software engineer wouldn't be surprised that you wouldn't get it right the first time. But I do strongly believe that will get better over time. There's no guarantee. I could be wrong. I mean, this could be something that just never gets good enough. But I think at least the jury's out, and the fact that people are saying, oh, you could just, it doesn't really work, or it's bad, it generates bad code, or there's a lot of criticisms of it, and I do believe those are all valid. I'm not 100% sure though that means that it's not going to work. So anyway, there are lots of ways to use LLMs as better tooling for people to use, and and then there are ways to use LLM to interact with your customer better, right? Through AI agents that talk to the customer using voice and video, and interact with them using speech, right? Or text, I suppose, but voice is probably the more interesting one long term. Or a very interesting one for interacting with your customer. I suppose you could have a customer write you a letter and you would write it back again, or text back and forth for sure. But I think voice is probably more interesting long term for customers, customer service and things like that. Okay, so that's all interesting, but there's a totally different side of the coin, which is so that's kind of shrinking team size maybe. But there are lots of things in business that I think could be fully automated. In other words, they don't really need human interaction. Like, so, example of this would be, accounting, HR, and certainly all kinds of back office kind of transactions that are unique to the business, shipping and all those kinds of things. A lot of those things don't really need to, a lot of those things are kind of a bunch of people in the same department talking to each other, right? And so you could build tools to help them, but you could also just completely automate the function, right? So an example of this is the one that I fall back to is being a stockbroker, right? So it used to be thought that you really needed a broker to handle all the details of making a stock trade. a human broker. But nowadays, that's almost never the case in any stock transaction. The only time you might have a stock transaction where a human broker gets involved is if it's a very large trade and a broker at a big investment bank will be able to find liquidity for that by finding people that don't have bids, don't have bids or offers in the marketplace, but are interested in buying or selling large blocks of shares. And then, so then it's a discovery mechanism, and that broker gets involved, and that is very helpful. But you know, even large transactions today are routinely handled by completely automated fashion. For example, there's nobody on the floor anymore trading. I mean, you see that, but almost all trades are handled on an electronic matching engine. And then all of the post-trade stuff, it's very complicated and boring to most people, not to me. I'm interested in that, but I won't go into too much detail. But there's a lot of post-trade stuff that was done manually. That's all automated now. Well, I'm not 100% sure it's all automated. The broker I worked for, Interactive Brokers, it was entirely automated, but I suppose there's companies that still do post-trade in a non-automated way. But it can be done and is increasingly done in an automated fashion. There, again, there are always exceptions for, say, these non-exchange traded products and stuff like that. But still, most of that stuff was thought to be too complex, pretty complex to automate, but it turns out it's not. It takes a while, and it takes work, and it takes programmers who are maybe focused a little bit more on the domain, the topic at hand, and the programming, right? So they're more focused on kind of what is this business process that I'm trying to automate. And they have to dig into it and automate it. So my guess is that it's impossible for me to know for sure, because I haven't spent enough time inside of large companies that have very large numbers of people working for them. So, but my guess is most of the things in these businesses are only not automated because there's no one there that's sufficiently motivated to automate it, and or no, or interested in, or knowledgeable enough to automate it, but that there are large numbers of things that could be completely automated. Now, it's important to recognize that automation typically has what we would call pilots, or human monitors, humans who monitor the system. But those humans are very different from the people that they have a very different skill set than the people who do the job manually. So and there's 1% of the number of people. So the team size is like roughly 1% of what you would have. It could be, and sometimes much smaller, right? So and it's a different kind of job where you kind of handle these, what we call in programming, edge cases, right? So unusual cases. And when you detect a problem, the system kind of is designed to detect a problem where the automation is breaking down, and then the person, and typically this, so you wouldn't have a lot of this in Facebook or Google, and it's mostly because Facebook and Google are advertising, are in the business of advertising, right? So they're ultimately an error in that, an error in their they don't have any people kind of manually looking at stuff. Like because basically an error in a delivery of an advertisement, or any of the stuff that makes us want to go there and causes us to see the advertising, the error isn't particularly damaging. So you kind of try to detect them and catalog them and then fix them, kind of in a general way, out of line, and try to improve the system to make it better. And then you kind of just have lots of errors all the time, but you don't really, it's not really that big of a deal. So whereas in stock transaction, it's impossible to describe how important it is that you never have an error. There are errors, but it's important to understand that these could be very, very expensive. So you have people, depending on the firm and depending on how they're doing it, that monitoring that and fixing fixing it right away. Now, so automation doesn't mean full automation doesn't necessarily mean no people are involved. When I call it full automation, I just mean it's mostly machines talking to each other. It's not primarily some machines doing some work, which is then delivered to a human, which is then the human then does something and maybe delivers it then to another machine, or where humans are routinely in the loop, maybe in the loop for pretty much every transaction. So that would be partial automation, right? Where you automate a piece of it, but humans are in the loop. But I think what I'm interested in, what I think people should be interested in is how to take important products or services that are delivered in the market today and figuring out how to do part of the business of delivering that product or service in a completely automated way. It doesn't mean that every function in the company will be able, will be able to be done robotically or through automation, but most of them could be probably automated, but there's probably some very, very requiring a lot of judgment and skill that would be hard automated. Though it's surprising how many of those can be automated. But partly some of it is just more, way, way more expensive to automate than it is to hire people to do it. But I think, just to be clear, that's not always a good excuse. The reason you automate stuff is certainly because it's cheaper, but it also is it also has lots of other benefits. And so you often see stuff at Interactive Brokers that is not cheaper to automate than it is to do manually, but we automate it anyway because it gives you so many. It then becomes predictable and easy to reliably improve over time, and then it becomes also easy to change over time, quickly and adapt. And it also just generates enormous ability to scale, right? So it may not be too expensive to do this manually today, but why not, if you can, why not do it in an automated way so that then if your business grows by, 1,000% or 1,000 times even, you will still, the program will still be fine doing it. It typically doesn't require any changes to scale up, to do that kind of scaling. Whereas if it's human automated, it requires an enormous amount of effort and time to scale. So, so it also changing things requires, in a human process, requires re-educating people. And whereas an automated process can be changed just by changing code, and it also reduces documentation costs and all kinds of things like this, because you don't need documentation for something that's encoded. You might document it, but you can also look at the code, and the code, if well written, will actually tell you what it's doing. So it kind of reduces all kinds of documentation. So I think that people are, I think that LLMs are going to be useful for a few things where interacting directly with a customer, where the customer is likely to be a human for, they just are humans, right? And that's who you're providing your customer. The customer isn't kind of another company, a human at another company that's doing something. It's an end consumer that I think an LLM is going to be very special for, and I think it's going to be useful for some other things that are not consumer facing. But I think people are kind of missing the point if they think that that's the future of AI. And that's, if you're trying to build a business and that's what you're thinking about, I think you ought to be considering the other things that can be done with AI where you would just kind of completely automate it, right? So those things maybe aren't LLMs, but there's other there's, so that's why I talk about quant and AI differently, because um, some of the to do, to do full automation, you could use AI. AI might be part of that. There's also just a lot of configuration and just kind of um, replicating documenting, understanding, and replicating the process, which isn't particularly AI-ish. And then there's some part that's just prediction and decision making, I guess is a better word for it. So doing the science to understand like what's the optimal decision. So there's optimizers, which is just a different kind of mathematical algorithm that can be encoded using computer languages. And then there is quant, which is prediction, or kind of science, right? So discovering the cause of, the relationships between two different things. So what you want is, I think, unless you're in customer service and maybe sales and stuff like that, or maybe some kinds of healthcare and stuff. What you want is a business that really looks at fully automating something. And then if you're doing that, then I'm not sure that LLMs are exactly where I'd start. I'd start a little bit more with quant, science and prediction, data science, automated data science. Quant is my just kind of shorthand for kind of automated data science, and prediction. Um, it, and my guess is, kind of that that's how it's going to be done, and that some neural network type algorithms or reinforcement learning type algorithms are going to be useful for this kind of full automation. Um, and maybe some modified versions of LLMs, because maybe they do parse and make take, even though humans are not in the loop, they're taking information that's encoded in either images or some kind of complex, unstructured format, and so they're making that available. But then it would be kind of a different kind of LLM, because the input would be that material, but the output would be structured data. So it's not just an LLM, it's an LLM plus or an LLM prime, right? So it's either an LLM plus other stuff, or a, a large language model that's modified to do different things than they do now. And those will come, and maybe LLMs seem pretty powerful. So I mean, it's kind of super naturally cool how they work. So that's, it's not really a good reason to assume that they'll be useful in full automation, but I think my guess is that it's kind of an interesting thing. So you might want, so that they might become interesting. But lots of regular things like linear models and other nonlinear models that aren't neural networks might be interesting. Time series stuff is always kind of interesting, doesn't really work with neural networks. So but time series prediction is not the be all end all either. A lot of times you're just looking for structure. But it is interesting. And so, because the linear, causation, right? So that the cause precedes the effect, right? So that's why time series stuff is interesting. I would suggest though that if you happen to be an engineer that's looking for stuff to, looking for a business to solve. Say you're a software engineer, right? And you're looking at the writing on the wall. You're worried that software engineering at scale, lots of people is going away, or you're coming out of school and the hiring is not great. You're looking for a business to solve. I would think about things that you can fully automate, and not and additionally what new products that LLMs make possible that are consumer products, or to some degree enterprise level products, though it's kind of not clear that that's what's gonna that there's going to be room for independent new products there. It's all going to be eaten by Microsoft, but we'll see. So, but I would suggest looking for things that can be both those human interaction, direct to consumer, or things that can be fully automated in the enterprise level. And I tend to think of those as this is an interesting question, but I tend to think of those as potentially for those enterprise things that can be fully automated. I tend to think of them as a services plus product thing, because my experience with them is that to automate these processes, there may be of course there are certain aspects to business that are near identical across many different businesses, but but there may be a number of these that you would kind of want to customize it for the individual thing, and that the ability to do that requires some service engagement, I believe. And so, and there's also a strong influence on these enterprise things that are psychological, that determine whether they get done. There's a very, very strong psychological component that is interesting and has a huge impact on success. All right. I think that's going to be a nice long, this is a nice long video. Too long even to put on LinkedIn, but it will go up on YouTube, and then we'll maybe abstract some things for LinkedIn and there. But I would love to hear people's, in the comments, thoughts about full automation, and tell me whether you think that there are lots of things. Say you're in a business, right? Do you think there are lots of candidates for full automation in there, or am I too optimistic about that? I would love to hear. Okay, great.